I really like the idealism of the Institute for Cultural Entrepreneurship and Clara Maveglia's initiative, which I really admire. As Clara Maveglia already said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medic. My profession is philosophy of science, theory of science, sociology of science. So I study scientists, researchers. And more specifically, I study psychiatrists and psychologists, the professionals as well as their sciences. For the past couple of years, I focused on one big issue in rich, affluent countries, which is that the numbers of people being diagnosed with a mental disorder are increasing. Here you see the top 10 therapies, antipsychotics and antidepressants are among them. And if you realize that there also are lists of 500, the top 500 medications, then you realize how high these psychiatric drugs are on the list. Now, many people have wondered about this. Oh no, I should say something else first. If we count the people using medications, we haven't counted the number of people yet who, for instance, work on their depression, are combating depression, because not everybody takes medications to fight depression. There are also people having psychotherapy, maybe without medications, or using self-help books, or are using light therapy, or go to a private company for transcranial magnetic stimulation. I don't know whether you have them in Germany, but in Holland, people can even buy second-hand equipment for transcranial magnetic stimulation and then help patients without a license, not necessary. I guess you know, as I know, that in some people depression can be very severe. And if you don't know, you can read books about this, like this one, but I'm sure you have them in German as well. Novelists, for instance, explain things about depression, and that can be very severe. But that's estimated, these people are estimated at less than 1%. So all the people, the increasing numbers of people using medications for depression, it's about 6% in the Netherlands, about 10% in Switzerland, and don't know about Germany. I tried to find out, but couldn't find out. And it's not only the increase of use of antidepressants, but also the increase of use of all these other ways of combating depression. And many people have wondered about this. What is going on? Why specifically in affluent countries? Why would we try, establish a beautiful orchestra of doctors to help people in all kinds of countries if all this doesn't help? Better medical services, better housing, our generation hasn't experienced a war, etc., etc. If people here only get more depressed, then what's the point of trying to make us richer? Since more people have wondered about this, there are several explanations. These are the most common explanations. One is, I'm talking about depression, it concerns a brain disease that has always existed, and in countries rich enough, it can be easily diagnosed and treated. The second explanation is pharmaceutical companies taught us to frame all kinds of suffering as a disorder. And the third common explanation is the welfare state has deprived us of our resilience. We have become whiners. We can't take anything anymore. We call ourselves depressed too easily. And we have far too many psychologists and psychiatrists and psychiatric nurses, etc. So these are three common explanations. And I will argue in my talk that only the second explanation actually holds true, but it isn't sufficient. It is, yes, it's part of the story, but it can't explain really what is going on. And I argue that the first and the third explanation are wrong. These three explanations have one thing in common. They presume that depression only comes in a light and a strong version. And I argue that this is the main mistake we make when we try to explain this, what you could call epidemic of depression. What we should do is be aware that the word depression nowadays refers to all kinds of unhappiness. It has gotten increasing numbers of meanings. And I explore these meanings. Like I do as a philosopher of science, we never say science is this or that. We always say, how is the word science being used in various communities and various times? I'm going to do that with the word depression as well. I've written a book about this, and I don't want to sell my book to you because you can't read it. It's in Dutch, but I want to show the cover of the book. This might strike as a weird cover for a book about depression, but I hope that by the end of my talk, you will agree that this is the best cover the book could get. And I will present my fourth explanation, and I hope then you will agree that this is the best cover the book could get. Now, if we look at the first explanation, it consists of two parts. It concerns a brain disease that has always existed. Let us first look at the first part, that has always existed. When you Google history depression, or you read a psychiatric handbook, you get a standard history of depression, arguing it has always existed. Kraepelin, and you probably know Kraepelin, famous German psychiatrist who introduced the biological paradigm, Sigmund Freud, and then back into history until Hippocrates. And these histories say what was formerly called melancholy is our depression now. These are histories written by sometimes pharmaceutical companies, but also histories written by professionals in psychiatry or psychology themselves. These are the kinds of histories professional historians have all kinds of ugly words for. Professionals of historians dislike these kind of histories. They call them finalism. They accuse them of finalism, presentism, preface history, feel-good history. Why is that? What these histories do, they take a present-day definition, search in the past for authors who, on some pages in their works, have said something that looks like the present-day definition. They only select these authors, and they only select the pages from these authors' books that are like our present-day definition, and they leave out the other pages. And in this way, they draw a line from the present to the past, and next, write down the history as if it unrolled itself from the past to the present. So that's why it's, for instance, called preface history, because these kind of histories are in the prefaces to students' handbooks. And if the paradigm of a field changes, then the student's handbook will be quickly rewritten and there will be new heroes from the past. That's what historians of science dislike, professional historians. Well, I showed you, for instance, Burton, just to illustrate the point. In these histories, Burton's book, The Anatomy of Melancholy, will always be included. And it's said this is a book about depression. But if you only look briefly at the cover, you can see it can't be about our present-day depression because there are only men on the cover. And in our countries, 2/3 of the medications and other treatments for depressions are go to women. And if you open the book briefly, the man on the cover will be explained. Vanity is on the cover, and suspicion is on the cover, and raving madness. Burton explains the figures. So that's not what our depression is. Even wisdom is on the cover. So melancholy in Burton referred to nearly anything. The word depression only entered the medical profession somewhere in the mid-19th century. German Barriers, a professional historian of science, describes a French medical dictionary that introduced the word depression as a medical thing. And in this dictionary, depression was not an illness in itself, as it is nowadays. It was a consequence of physical illness, like cardiovascular disease. Until today, people with cardiovascular problems may get very, depressed, so unhappy. But in this 19th century dictionary, depression was not a disorder or a disease in itself. Kraepelin, a psychiatrist, introduced the word depression as part of the expression manic depression. So that he referred to people who in one instance would be exuberant and on the other moment down. But that too is not the same as our word depression nowadays. Kraepelin, for all the disorders he described, he hypothesized biological causes, arguing, I don't know which one, but there must be biological causes. In 1913, he added an extra chapter, Das manisch-depressive Irrsein. And here you see pictures of women. And that's because this disorder was considered to be an emotional disorder, whereas melancholy in Burton's book was a matter of cognition, and that's why it mostly referred to men. Kraepelin's contemporary, Freud should be here, he's not here. Kraepelin's contemporary, Sigmund Freud, used the word melancholy in a way that more or less resembled our own depression, although in Freud, Freud did not so much refer to biological causes as to causes, depression caused by things that happened in a person's life. Now, the DSM-3, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, called the Psychiatric Bible of 1980, was mostly inspired by Kraepelin. So the DSM-3 argued there must be biological causes, but we don't know them, and hence we don't say anything about causes in this manual. We simply give definitions. We say a psychiatrist is allowed to speak of ADHD when a person meets this or that criteria. Oh, well, the order of I did something with the slides, but never mind. Here's Sigmund Freud. He influenced the first DSM, the older one, the first edition. In this DSM, there's talk of depressive reaction to circumstances. Now, can you say that depression has always existed? Can you say that Marcus Cicero, before Christ, suffered from major depressive disorder because he met the criteria of our present-day diagnostic and statistical manual disorders? According to historians of science, you can't, because if you do, you act as if it didn't make a difference at all, that since the early 20th century, the suffering of a person like Cicero was considered a disorder. And that made a big difference. In addition, the definition of depression changed after the word was introduced into the medical profession. According to a Freudian perspective, it's something completely different than according to a Kraepelinian perspective. If you go to a psychiatrist who works according to a biological model, you will be treated differently. You will perhaps get medications. But if you go to a psychiatrist who works according to a psychoanalytical model or psychodynamic model, you will be asked about your childhood. And according to the psychodynamic psychiatrists, your stories about your childhood will be interesting. They need to be analyzed. According to the biological model, they are part of your symptoms, and you need to stop thinking all the time about what happened to you. So this is depression in a completely different sense, with a completely different meaning. Same for ADHD. to compare the idea, to expand on the idea, there are a lot of histories of ADHD. They always include Heinrich Hoffmann, Struwwel, Peter, but it's no surprise that there always have been unruly children. It's no surprise that there always have been hyperactive children. It's a surprise that in the middle of the 20th century, this became a disorder. In addition, after that, the definition of ADHD, the meaning of the expression, kept on changing. And what a professional history of ADHD will do is trace all these different definitions of ADHD and ask what the consequences of the changes of the definition were. So it concerns a disease that has always existed. According to professional historians of science, this is really sloppy history. Now let's look at, it concerns a brain disease, back to depression. Kraplin's idea was sustained when psychotropic drugs came on the market. By the way, I made this picture in the Ghislain Museum in Ghent. If you have time to visit, do go there. It's a fantastic museum. So when these medications came on the market, Kraplin's hypothesis that psychiatric disorders had a biological cause, was sustained. And for depression, especially when the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors came on the market. First one was Prozac, and subsequently, after the 1980s, more of these kinds of medications came on the market. It was only a hypothesis that was sustained. If these medications do enhance mood, this does not yet prove that depression has a biological cause. Because suppose that if alcohol makes us chatty and happy, this of course does not yet mean that the people who are not chatty and happy lack alcohol in their brains. If cocaine gives us a lot, encourages us to do a lot of things, that does not yet mean that the cowards among us lack cocaine in their brains. So researchers were aware of that, and they studied the hypothesis that maybe depression has to do with lacking chemicals in the brain. In the meantime, pharmaceutical companies sustained this hypothesis with many drawings and animations, etc. They are also in the psychiatric handbooks, and all these drawings give the impression that this is that depression is caused by lacking serotonin transmission in the brain. However, I could show you a lot of articles arguing that this is a hypothesis in decline. It's not an agreed upon fact in the scientific world at all. I'm not going to show you these scientific articles because I can prove this much more easily by referring to the websites of pharmaceutical companies for Prozac, for Effexor, etc. If you read their text carefully, you will see that they express themselves in a hypothetical way. The growing awareness that depression is an illness with probable biological causes. Effexor is believed to work, or Cymbalta is thought to be associated with mood. Oh, this is a more present-day one. Watch how chemicals in the body may affect how you feel emotionally and physically. So there's a lot of uncertainty going on when it comes to the question of, is this a brain disease? Is this a brain disorder? Now, of course, you could argue, well, a lot of money is being put in biological research and neurobiological research these days. The pictures get increasingly sophisticated, the research is increasingly sophisticated. So suppose that in the near future, there will at least be a particular kind of depression that is clearly caused by, has a clear biological cause. Would that prove that it concerns a biological disorder? Well, suppose that in the near future, the biological correlates of homosexuality will be clear. Does that prove that homosexuality is a disease or a disorder? I think many of you would say no. And actually, historians argue that homosexuality is also an example of a characteristic that has not always existed. And it's very educational to go into their arguments. They argue, yes, intimacy among people with similar bodies has always existed. You can see that on Etruscan pots and pans. You can see this in the Musea in Tuscany. But it didn't need to have a name. It was simply something people could do. Like orange eaters, people don't have to be named after their preference for oranges. In the course of time, however, this became a sin in the Middle Ages. And later on, it even became a crime. Oscar Wilde, famously, was put into jail for it. And it was then that doctors said, well, it may be a crime, but it is a crime due to a disorder. These people have antipathic sexual instinct, psychopathia sexualis. And this is how the word homosexuality came into being and entered the psychiatric handbook, the DSM. In the first two versions, homosexuality was in the DSM. The philosopher Ian Hacking has written a book, The Social Construction of What? And he introduced the expression making up people. First, I do this. The expression making up people. He says our sciences, the social sciences and psychiatry and medicine, they make up people. And he doesn't mean that in a derogatory sense, just in a descriptive sense. In the London Review of Books, he explained it in this way. We think of kinds of people as definite classes defined by definite properties, but it's not quite like that. Sometimes our sciences create kinds of people that in a certain sense did not exist before. I call this making up people. Now, making up people can be can really help people. I showed you Oscar Wilde in the 19th century. Liking people with similar body was considered a crime or a sin, and that still goes on these days. In the United States, in the 21st century, it's still a sin. In Iran, people can get killed for it. So to them, it is an advantage when they have a disorder rather than are being criminals. On the other hand, if the other option, oh no, I should not say on the other hand, I just should say if the other option is being bad, most people prefer to have a disorder. And I would like you to keep that in mind about our present-day societies. Our present-day societies are not that tolerant about people who differ. Nevertheless, when you have a disease or a disorder, you may have an advantage. That may be an advantage if the other option is that you're bad. But if you have a disorder or disease, you need to get treated. And the history of the treatment of homosexuality is not a very happy history. So people's battle for recognition of themselves as patients may obstruct their battle for equal rights. People who were being called homosexuals were aware of that in the 1970s. They picketed against the inclusion of homosexuality in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And the interesting thing about this, if you look at the shield the woman is carrying, she uses the word homosexuals. That word was introduced in the 19th century to say these people have a disease. So the word homosexual did not disappear, although the meaning of the word homosexual changed. Homosexuals do not have a disorder anymore in most countries. So until today, scientists are researching the brains and genes of people called homosexuals, but their research is still based on kind of a value judgment, on the idea that people should be singled out on the basis of their sexual preferences. That, of course, holds for all the other disease criteria in the DSM. Until today, we are searching for the biological correlates of categories in the DSM. But if you see a picture of a brain saying matter increase in ADHD, you should be aware that there is no sign disorder in the brain. There's only matter increase. And there's people who are maybe hyperactive or people who do not concentrate. That this should be called a disorder precedes the brain research. So the brain research is based on decisions. And there is a movement nowadays of people who do the same as the people being called homosexuals in the 1970s. They argue we are just different. This is the movement for neurodiversity. Every brain is beautiful. Even, I get back to the example of depression, there are people like the Dutch writer Marcel Meuring. He called his book The Pleasure of Suffering. That's not really what he means. I don't agree with the title. The book argues, yes, I am unhappy. I often am very, very unhappy. But don't tell me I have a disorder. I don't have a disorder. You know who has a disorder? People who are never unhappy. Because there's enough to be unhappy about in the world. Now, I would never say to one of I know people who are severely depressed, I would never say, please read this book. That's not why I'm evoking this title. What I want to say is that it inevitably is a matter of definition whether or not particular behavior is a disorder. Well, what is a disorder? Currently, Alan Francis, who was the chair of the committee that composed the current version of the DSM, currently this Professor Alan Francis is arguing everywhere, he's all over the world, he's arguing that the expansion of psychiatric diagnostic categories has gone far too far. The DSM has run wild in his view. Well, if you ask him what is a psychiatric disorder, you will get probably this answer. I have read dozens of definitions of mental disorder, and I can't say that any have the slightest value whatsoever. Well, that's kind of shocking when it comes from one of the most important figures in worldwide psychiatry. And I think, being a sociologist of science, that in a sense he's right. You can't give an eternal transcultural definition of a psychiatric disorder, but you can ask a sociological question about the definition of a mental disorder. You can still ask, when do we call a characteristic a disorder? What do we mean when we use that word? Well, first of all, we mean that the characteristic should not be accepted. It means that you don't have to live with your depression. You don't have to live with your unhappiness. That's what it means. Or it means maybe you want to live with your anorexia, but your anorexia is not acceptable to others. So that's the first meaning. But not all characteristics that are not acceptable are characteristics that should be handled by psychiatry, by mental health care. For instance, greed in the banking sector is not considered a disorder. So there is a second criterion we are implicitly using when we use the word disorder. The second one is that we imply that doctors should treat it, rather than anti-discrimination laws, or the church, or other kinds of social policy, etc. So that's what we mean, I think, when we use the word disorder. Now, when we realize this sociological definition, we can ask the next question. We can ask, why do we increasingly regard all kinds of characteristics as a disorder, biological or non-biological? That is, why do we think they shouldn't be accepted, and why do we think doctors should treat them? For instance, lack of concentration in girls who are not hyperactive has become a disorder, also according to the DSM. Gambling has become something for doctors. Insufficient sex has become a disorder. Even loneliness. Here the old woman says, I just feel alone. And the answer is Cymbalta, an antidepressant. So how could this happen? Well, maybe it's the second explanation. It's pharmaceutical companies that have taught us to frame all kinds of suffering as a disorder. I just showed you advertisement by pharmaceutical companies. There are lots of books explaining to you what pharmaceutical companies are doing in this respect these days. I'm not going to repeat them. I guess you've read about this in newspapers. I just add that you might check this out yourself, for instance, by reading Pharmaceutical Executive on the internet, where you will find advertisements like this one. We have to use Facebook and YouTube, etc., in order to reach the public directly. You can read about Facebook communities by Johnson & Johnson, or Janssen Silag. It's a producer of Concerta, and it established Facebooks for moms of ADHD patients, the Facebook for Mombassadors, it is called. Or you can read on the internet medical marketing and media. And then, for instance, you will find these three ladies working for Shire, big pharmaceutical company, and explaining how they tell students that they have ADHD. These three women, they argue that people around 20 years old are extremely savvy and cynical, so you should use special techniques for them. And they use a campaign with Maroon 5 singer Alan Levine, etc., etc. They explain their strategies to you. Here's Alan Levine. It's using celebrities is a very common technique. So can we say pharmaceutical companies taught us to frame all kinds of suffering as a disease or a disorder? Yes, they do. But is that a sufficient explanation? No, because people combat depression in various other ways as well, not only with medications. Many people don't want medications. They use fish oil or antidepressant jugging. In addition, not only pharmaceutical companies designed educational campaigns about depression, other institutions do the same, like the US National Institute of Mental Health in the campaign Real Man, Real Depression. Or, for instance, the 1 in 4 campaign that was conducted in Britain and in the Netherlands. 1 out of 4 people will get a mental disorder. This is Mental Health Care the Netherlands, with advertisements, page-wide advertisements in newspapers. So referring only to the pharmaceutical companies is not enough. Also because we need to know why their campaigns are attractive to people. You can't sell anything people don't want to have. Many people want medications for ADHD and for depression and for what else. So there is more at hand than only the pharmaceutical companies. That brings me to the third explanation. The welfare state has deprived us of our resilience. I hear that quite often. People are whiners. Parents don't want to educate their children anymore. They simply use drugs to regulate them. People have become lazy. They don't work hard enough at themselves and at their children. A couple of a British book and an American book with this kind of argumentation. They say, well, the helping professions, we have too many people working in a helping profession. They tell the population that their unhappiness or their problems is due to their youth or to their biology, and in this way they make people helpless because they give them an excuse and people don't work at themselves anymore. is that a good explanation? I think it's not. Why not? First of all, it's not no fun to take an antidepressant. People are suffering from side effects. People are suffering from feelings of guilt. If you interview them, they will tell you, I feel guilty because I feel I should do it myself. And as I said, the side effects. Same for parents with children using ADHD drugs. Parents often feel guilty. They want the best for their child, etc. In addition, this increase of the use of antidepressant medications and other means to combat depression started in the 1990s. And that was the time when the welfare state got into decline. We don't have governments anymore that pamper us and that say we will help you throughout your life. We have governments now that say, well, success is a choice. So here's my fourth explanation, my own explanation. It's not the welfare state that is related to this increase in people combating depression or this increase in the use of psychiatric drugs. It's neoliberal market societies that make people work at themselves. These societies have a leading principle. It is success is a choice, and hence failure is a choice as well. And do I have time, Clara, to back up this? Yes? Okay, I'd like to back up this explanation a little bit. And I will do that with the help, again, of advertisements by pharmaceutical companies. I could have used advertisements from the banking sector or from the food sector. Never mind, because this morale, this ethics is everywhere now. But I will use advertisements by the pharmaceutical sector because that's what my talk is about. It's about psychiatric disorders. When a pharmaceutical company designs a marketing campaign, it first does market research. It hires companies that do market research, and these companies find out what will work with people. So these advertisements actually are a mirror to us. They give a message, but they also mirror us. Here is the company Hunsworth Health. It works for the pharmaceutical sector, and it offers its services to the pharmaceutical sector, saying, we believe great branding begins with the customer. We get inside their heads, garner rich insights in what they want and need. And I find it fascinating that this is mostly qualitative research. I work in a psychology department, and psychologists think, well, quantitative research, surveys, etc., that's the best research. But these companies know that you learn much more about people when you, so to say, live a while with them. So what have they learned? What is it that the customer wants, what we want and need? From the very beginning that mood enhancers came on the market, it was not easy happiness, as the people from the third explanation say. It's easy happiness, etc. From the very beginning, it was not. Here's an advertisement from 1956. You see a woman here with dirty dishes. At first I thought, how could marketing people design an advertisement showing context for unhappiness? Well, this was pre-DSM-3. This was in psychoanalytic, psychodynamic times. So these advertisements had to address doctors who are thinking in psychodynamic terms. And at first I thought, this is feminism, but it's so early. Well, of course it wasn't feminism, because the effect of the medication should be that she turns around and does the dishes, rather than that she runs away. So the text says, many of your patients, particularly housewives, are crushed under a load of dull routine duties that leave them in a state of mental and emotional fatigue. For these patients, you may find dexedrine an ideal prescription. So, and it's not to help her to create a new life for herself, but it's to help her to adapt to the life she has. In the course of time, after the DSM-3 was introduced, the life story of people started to disappear from the advertisements. If you look at this one, this is post-DSM-3. The DSM-3, as I told you, supposes biological causes. This man has social anxiety disorder. The text is about circumstances. He is overwhelmed with social situations. He doesn't dare to speak in public. He doesn't dare to ask someone out for a date, nor to talk to his boss. But we only see his head, so the problem is in his head. And his shirt and tie explain that he has to function well. So these medications are not about easy happiness. Nor are they about you being, or us, being excused for our biology, as people like Frank Furedi say, or the two books I just showed you. Oh, it's an easy excuse, it's your biology. It isn't, because these days we think that we can govern our biology. We are being told that our biology is in our own hands. Are you doing everything you can to help yourself feel better? Find out how to help yourself even more. We are responsible for our biology. It's not nature is given and culture is being taught. No, in my country, you can be sent out of the country because of your culture. So apparently the Dutch think that culture is not plastic at all, whereas we think that nature is plastic. We can manipulate our nature. This is a campaign by Pfizer, pharmaceutical company Pfizer, that was conducted in the outer skirts in the black neighborhoods of Baltimore and Washington. And it's a campaign, an educational campaign about depression. It's called Be Powerful. And it says, this is a picture of how these neighborhoods look. It says, how to pronounce this condition, depression. So the black people learn how to pronounce it. And then it says there is social inequality because there's more depression among blacks than whites, but the whites have higher access to the medication. Next, it says depression is an illness that affects a person's mental state or mood. So here, depression is the cause of the unhappiness. It's in the person, him or herself. It has been shown that a chemical imbalance in the brain may cause depression. This chemical imbalance may run in families. Look at the may. I showed you these web pages by pharmaceutical companies before. They have to express this in a hypothetical sense because the scientific proof is lacking. But still they suggest that the cause of by calling unhappiness depression, you already suggest that the cause is biological and not social. Well, of course, there is a lot of literature about the social determinants of health, but this is sociological research and doesn't have such a high status as neurobiological research. And it's not only poverty, as in the book by Marmot and Wilkinson in 2005, a later book by Wilkinson and Pickett explains that all kinds of social inequality makes people unhappier, even at universities or in all kinds of professions. So this concerns not only poor people. Well, as I said before, people's battle for recognition of themselves as patients may obstruct their battle for equal rights. Same holds for housewives these days, I would say, or for feminism. If you believe that your unhappiness is caused by something in your body, you will work at your body. And you will feel responsible for your biology, as is expressed in this advertisement. It's in Dutch, and on the drawing it says, "Mommy is nice again." Now, this advertisement addresses us at our wish to be nice. But the newer advertisements address us at something at much more than that. Addresses us at our wish to be our better selves. Here you see a woman, she's singing, she's in the sun, And the advertisement expresses that nature is plastic because the people at the back haven't taken the Effexor yet and they are still in the rain. So this really expresses that our biology is in our own hands. Like this one, why drift through life when you can dance? This is not anymore about women who want to be nice mothers. This is about women who want to be better selves. I don't know whether you realize, but if you look around at billboards, you will see lots of running women, muscled running women. What does a muscled running woman have to do with mood and depression, etc.? Well, a lot. This is not only in advertisement by pharmaceutical companies, it's everywhere. I, for instance, had to send a picture to the Dutch railways for my reduction card. They wanted a picture on it, and the card would be valid for more than 1 year, as before, for 5 years actually. So I sent in the picture of the back of my book, because that at least was made by a professional photographer, and look how the card was returned to me. Like this. Well, now every time I sit in the train, I feel bad because I don't run enough. I don't train myself enough. And here is Elsevier magazine. It says, healthy from A to Z, 11 pages of the latest scientific facts to enhance your body and mind. The more trained you are, the happier you get. So if I get unhappy, I didn't train myself enough. And even my Dutch railway card teaches that to me. These days, here's the running woman again. Here she climbs her own DNA. And you may think this is a joke, but it's not a joke. You can climb your own DNA. We have the science of epigenetic these days. Epigenetics says that the expression of your genes is under the influence of circumstances. So circumstances may help your genes to express themselves or not. And that even can be inherited by your children, the ability of your genes to express themselves. Now, if you read that, we could draw the conclusion that then we should strive for a more equal society. Because if social inequality damages people, then it can even damage the expression of their genes. But that's not how the message of epigenetics is being adopted. This is from the Huffington Post recently. Exercise alters your DNA. So you even can master your own DNA these days, according to the present ideology. Well, this picture summarizes it when it comes to your brain. We are being told we are our brains, but we are also being told we can have our brains in our own hand. We can master, or we have to master, our own brains. So the subtitle of my talk and of the book I'm talking about is The Duty to Manage One's Destiny. We have the duty these days to manage our destiny. We don't need to have wrinkles in our skin anymore because there are all kinds of products to prevent that. And we don't need to have wrinkles in our minds anymore. No irregular teeth and no irregular minds. My explanation is, for the increase of psychiatric disorders, we traded in the ideal of the plastic society, the old idea, for that of the plastic individual. And in the meantime, the word depressed acquired an extra meaning, yet an extra meaning, of lacking resilience, lacking ambition, lacking entrepreneurship, and lacking success. Now, if success is a failure, if success is a choice, then lacking success is a choice as well. And of course, people need an excuse then. First of all, you get unhappy, and then you're the only one to blame, and then you're happy with a diagnosis. To summarize the argument, these two advertisements summarize the argument. In the first advertisements from the 1950s, the woman was depressed because she couldn't accept life as it is, and the pills help her to accept life as it is. The second advertisement from the 21st century, the woman was depressed because she accepted life too much as it is, and the medication helps you to become a better self. Now, this advertisement of the woman in the red dress was the inspiration for the cover of the book I showed you at the beginning of my talk. The designer of the cover came up with broken tulips. She came up with sad-looking women. She came up with a bunch of penguins in the rain. And constantly I thought, no, this is not a good cover. Wait a minute, this dancer. But then I would need dancers who are a picture of a dance that expresses the effort. And it should show that everybody is making the effort in the same way, but not together. And this is how the book ended up with this cover. Thank you very much.